Hey everybody, Dr. G here. I'm a clinical and forensic psychologist as well as a body language expert, but today we're not going to be analyzing body language. Today we're going to be doing a forensic analysis of Jeffrey Epstein's death and showing proof of a cover-up. Before we get started with this, a couple of quick things. One, I wanted to make sure you know this is not a psychological evaluation of any kind. These are just my opinions. In addition to that, I do want to remind you to like and subscribe if you want to see more content just like this. All right, let's go. Now, if you've watched my channel before, you've probably seen that I've covered the Epstein files pretty extensively. Previously, I've done a number of videos around Jeffrey Epstein's death and all of the problems related to what's reported around Jeffrey Epstein's death. I caught a figure walking up to his cell on camera. In addition, I've seen all sorts of inconsistencies in the information reported. But with the most recent batch of Epstein files, we now have more conclusive proof of a cover-up. We're going to be going over that. It's extremely complicated. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the proof first, and then I'm going to explain to you why it's proof. Because like I said, this is all very complicated. It took 4,000 pages of reading and a lot of hours of video watching to catch all of this and put all of this together. I'm going to show you everything that I've found. First, we're going to look at some footage from the prison where Epstein was held. This is new footage. This was released with the newest batch of Epstein files, so we have not seen this before, and it's proof positive that there is some form of cover-up. After that, we're going to be looking at the autopsy, not the actual pictures from the autopsy, nothing grotesque, but we're going to be looking at the descriptions from the autopsy, and I'm going to show you some inconsistencies that nobody has ever pointed out before. All right, let's just jump right in. If you look at the footage to the right here, it's labeled August 11th, 2019, around 2200 hours. And according to the government, this footage does not exist. Now, let me explain what I mean by that, because this was actually released in the latest batch of Epstein files. Now, Jeffrey Epstein's body was found on August 10th, 2019 at 6:33 a.m. Now, I want you to keep in mind, this is the next day, so you may be going, well, who cares? This is the day following. But this is extremely significant when you really understand everything that's been reported and all of the details of the case. In just a moment, I'm going to show you a map of this area. I'm going to show you where all of the cameras are. I'm going to show you where everybody is housed. I'm going to explain why, according to the government, this footage cannot exist. Now, watch these officers right here. I want to show you where they're going to go. Now, you see the staircase right here, the one that these officers are getting ready to walk up. This is where Jeffrey Epstein was housed. This is up to what's called L tier. This whole area is referred to as the SHU in the MCC. The MCC is the prison. The SHU is the special housing unit, so it's where people that are not in the general population are put, and each little area is called a tier. There's an upper tier and a lower tier. Jeffrey Epstein is housed in tier L, which is the upper tier. That's where these officers are walking right now. As you can see, you have a pretty clear shot of them. If you've seen previous videos about the footage that was released on the night of Jeffrey Epstein's death, the quality is terrible. It's actually from back here. If you look in the upper right, that's where that camera is. Actually, let's look at a map of all of this so you can really get a lay of the land and understand what cameras were supposed to be working and which ones weren't, and why this footage, once again, should not exist. Now, the figure on the right here is from the Office of the Inspector General of the Department of Justice. Now, if you've watched previous videos that I've done, I analyzed this a couple of times and talked about a lot of problems with this report, a lot of inconsistencies, but this is a diagram of all of the cameras up and around where Jeffrey Epstein was housed. Now, he was in the upper tier. Like I said, he was in tier L, which is right here, and Epstein's cell is right up front. Now, the camera that you just saw footage from is actually right here. You can see any of the cameras that have red squares around them are ones that, according to what's been reported, were not recording when Jeffrey Epstein died. So this is about to get very complicated, but I'm going to try to explain it as best as I can without overwhelming you with information. Essentially, there were two DVR systems that recorded the security camera footage. There was DVR1 and DVR2. Now, if you look here, there's the green dot says streaming and recording camera. So all of the green ones were the ones that were on DVR1. All the ones with red squares were on DVR2. Now, to understand the history of the DVR systems, we have to jump back to July 23rd. Hopefully you're able to follow. On July 23rd, Jeffrey Epstein was found at 1 a.m. with linen wrapped around his neck. Now, according to Jeffrey Epstein, from what he told other inmates, someone had tried to kill him. That is what he said. Now, the psychologists obviously came to different conclusions. They believe that he had done it himself. He ultimately told them, I don't remember what happened, and then he was ultimately put back in his cell on July 29th. Now, incidentally, July 29th is the same day that the DVR2 system, the one that isn't working, went out. Now, they didn't find out about that until August 8th. Now, on August 8th, they realized the DVR2 system was not working correctly. However, it is a long and challenging process to fix these things. We're going to get into the technical parts of that a bit later, but apparently it's very difficult and is very labor intensive to fix this problem. So they didn't have time to fix it, and they had not started working on it yet until after Jeffrey Epstein's death. So the footage that was released months ago, the footage that was released from the night of Jeffrey Epstein's death, is all from this camera right here. The other footage that was released was from this camera over here. According to what's been reported, those are the only cameras on DVR1. So you may be asking, well, what is it that I just showed you? Well, that actually is from this camera right here. Now we're going to hop back to that footage. I'm going to show you a little bit more that's interesting about this footage. According to the diagram we just looked at, there are two functioning cameras. One's over here, one's in a hallway that we're going to look at in a second, but this is not one of them. This was specifically marked as one of the cameras that was not working. Now, for anybody that's getting confused about all of this DVR stuff, basically, when you have security cameras, they have to record somewhere. They're recorded to hard drives housed in big DVR systems. So you're going to have DVR1 with a whole bunch of hard drives that are apparently all fully functioning, and then you're going to have DVR2, another batch of hard drives that have different cameras attached to them, but those were not functioning. They were not recording. Now, according to the Inspector General's office, this footage right here was on DVR2, the one that was not recording, the one that was corrupt, the one that for a million reasons was not accessible. DVR1 was fully functioning. Now, what I think was that this actually was footage from DVR1, and I'll explain why that's significant. First of all, the reason that this footage at all is significant is the angle we're getting. If somebody went up to Jeffrey Epstein's tier the night that he was murdered, we would see it clear as day from this angle. There would be no disputing it. There would be no question about it. You would 100% be able to see if somebody went through that door over there, for example, and walked up to Jeffrey Epstein's tier. Now, no other angle will show you clearly what happened. This angle absolutely would. And that's why this footage is so significant, because this would clear up any question about whether or not anybody actually went up to where Jeffrey Epstein was housed the night of his death. Later on, we're going to look at an email from the FBI that talks about a third camera of interest on the DVR1 system. In other words, the DVR system that was actually functioning, actually recording, actually capturing everything. It only refers to this once in this email, and it says that they could get all the information going all the way back to July 23rd, the first date of interest. I believe it's this camera specifically, and I'm going to show you why. Because if we rewind the beginning of this footage, it actually jumps to the hallway of the cameras that were actually working. I know this is getting confusing, but this hallway right here is one of what was reported to be one of the two working cameras. So we expect this footage to be working. This is not surprising at all. This is exactly what we would expect. They actually provided footage going all the way back to August 7th of this hallway, although some of it was edited, and we're going to jump to that later. But they did give us this footage, so we know this camera was working. This camera was supposed to be writing to DVR1, the working system. Now watch what happens when I let this play ahead. You're going to seamlessly see this transition to this camera right here. And what that suggests is that they are in fact on the same circuit, the same system. So you have this camera and this camera recording to the same place. They're even kept in the same file. You can see it seamlessly transitions from one to the other. These are recording to the same place, which means that on this footage right here, they would have it going all the way back to July 23rd. So we would be able to see clear as day who it is that went up to L tier the night of Jeffrey Epstein's death. So there's really two possibilities. Either this footage right here was on the functioning cameras, and all of the footage from the night of Jeffrey Epstein's death and before is available, or at least was available before somebody probably deleted it, or this is on the DVR2 system, which is in fact fully functional, and that there's actually footage from all of the different angles. Either way, if you look at all of the information reported, this camera cannot have captured this and saved it to a DVR according to everything that we're being told. Now, I get this is August 11th. This is the day after Jeffrey Epstein's death. You may think, well, maybe they did a quick rush job and fixed all of it. But we know for a fact that's not true. We're going to look at emails later that show even by the 12th, they hadn't even started trying to fix it yet. So we know for a fact DVR2, the one that this was reported to be on, was not working at that time. Have you ever Googled your own name or email address? Before I had Aura, I did, and wow, it was my full name, my old address, phone number, all sorts of information I did not want people to have. That's why I started using Aura, today's sponsor. If you've ever wondered how scammers get your number or why your inbox is drowning in spam, this is why. They're companies called data brokers that collect and sell your personal information to marketers, scammers, and yes, even stalkers. They do it without your permission. The good news is they're legally required to remove it if you ask. The only issue is that it's time consuming and they make it as confusing as humanly possible. This is where Aura comes in. They take care of the hard part for you, automatically requesting removals from these data broker sites and keeping your info off of them over time. In the first 2 weeks, you'll see exactly where your personal data is exposed and start watching it disappear without you lifting a finger. It's an all-in-one digital security tool that gives you alerts if your personal info appears on the dark web, real-time fraud alerts for crediting and banking, 24/7 identity monitoring, a secure VPN, antivirus, password manager, and more, plus a $5 million identity theft insurance policy and US-based fraud experts available around the clock. You can try Aura free for 14 days at aura.com/Dr. G. That's enough time for Aura to start scrubbing your info off all of these data broker sites automatically. I'm not leaving myself vulnerable, and you shouldn't either. Go to aura.com/Dr. G and get started with your 14-day trial today. All right, back to the analysis. Now, the DOJ released days and days and days of footage of this hallway, going all the way back to August 7th, but I want you to pay attention to what happens on August 9th, close to midnight. Now, I had always said that I thought that Jeffrey Epstein was murdered around midnight, a little bit after. So as you can see, right now it's at around 2,300 hours, so this would be around 11 p.m. at night. And then all of a sudden, once we get to August 10th, it's going to skip to 1 a.m. Now, since that footage skipped, I figured, let's skip ahead. Let's see what happens around the time that Jeffrey Epstein's body was found. But when we reach 2 a.m., it in fact skips to 9 a.m. So that chunk of time is missing as well. So any time that anything significant happened around Jeffrey Epstein, all of the footage from all of the other angles is entirely missing. Now, if you remember, on July 23rd, Jeffrey Epstein had been found with an injury. That was, as I said, around 1 a.m. on July 23rd. So I decided to look and see what footage they released for the month of July, and it turned out they released footage that went back to early July, the whole month, except the footage around the time that Jeffrey Epstein's injury was reported. No footage around that exists. It skips that huge chunk of time. So anything in and around things that were reported to have happened to Jeffrey Epstein are not included in any of this footage. The footage is essentially useless in that sense. But the one thing, as I said, that we discovered was in fact that we have footage from a different angle. Now, another thing I want you to think about is that July 29th is when apparently everything stopped working, when reportedly all of the cameras weren't working. Now, July 23rd, when he was first found with an injury, apparently all of the cameras should have been working then. So why they only released this footage and not footage from the tier, not footage that shows what was going on? Apparently everything was working just fine on July 23rd, and none of that footage is to be found anywhere. So why is it that this terrible footage from this terrible angle is all they asked for when, according to what's been reported, all of the footage from every other angle was available from that time? Why is it that this is the only one that was released, and we don't even have the segment of time when the incident actually occurred? Now we're going to watch some footage that's labeled J tier. Now I'm going to explain why this is confusing. This is not dated. There's no timestamp. There's no way for us to identify when this is from, which is extremely unusual for security cameras. Now, the relevance of this is that this camera right here was supposed to be on the system that was not recording, that wasn't working. J tier is basically perpendicular to L tier. It's a separate tier, but it's right near where Jeffrey Epstein was housed. This angle right here is exactly what we should have been able to get from the cameras where Jeffrey Epstein was housed. Now, the FBI went twice to get hard drives from the prison. They went on August 10th and August 14th or 15th. It says both dates. So somewhere in that area. Regardless, the DVR system had not been fixed by then. So what this is from, when it's from, and why it's here is totally unknown. Because once again, this is not Jeffrey Epstein's tier. So why this is part of the Epstein files is perplexing. We're going to watch it and talk about what we see, but there's no context given. There's no date given. So this remains confusing. So as you can see, you have two officers walking past an open door. Now that open door right there, if this was L tier, if this was the tier that Jeffrey Epstein was on, that's equivalent to where Jeffrey Epstein would have been staying. He stayed in that front room right there. Why they're showing this, once again, I don't really know. But what we do see is we see an officer going up and talking to one of the inmates. Clearly there's an inmate directly to the left inside that room right there. He turns around and picks something up. It's unclear what this is. Maybe it's a note, but he doesn't seem to have a problem giving it back to the inmate right there. So you have these other officers up front. They're looking at this open room. It's so confusing as to what the relevance of this would be. Now, if this was L tier, obviously it would be relevant because this would be where Jeffrey Epstein was staying. The relevance of this continues to be puzzling, but we'll keep watching and then we'll talk about it. So you saw this officer that's down here at the end of the hallway. He seems to be listening to what this inmate's saying. He'd handed him something. They seem to be conversing about something. And then you have these officers down here that are talking about this open room. So once again, how this is relevant to the Epstein files, I would love to know. I wish there was more documentation because this is, at least as far as I've seen, not talked about anywhere in any of the Epstein files, in any of the documents, in any of the emails. And I'm telling you, I looked over 4,000 documents. I didn't see anything about this specifically. So why they have this is anybody's guess. But if nothing else, this does help you better understand the angle we would have gotten, how good a quality shot we would have gotten had the footage been available from L tier, from the place where Jeffrey Epstein was being housed. But it continues to be perplexing as to why this was included. And on top of that, where it came from. Because as I said, the FBI went twice, got all the hard drives. There was no discussion about additional footage being provided. As far as the hard drives that they got, none of them should have had any footage from this tier on it. Absolutely none of the DVRs or hard drives should have had any footage from right here. At least according to what was reported, because anything that was filmed from this camera should have been corrupted. At least that's what they said. Now we're going to go through some documents and I'm going to show you why that August 11th footage, based on their own words, should not exist. Now this email is from an FBI special agent. This was sent on March 9th, 2020, but was forwarded a message from August 14th, 2019. All right, this is a technical update of the DVR system. So Nice Vision was going to come in, do the work, get things replaced, and get everything updated. Now what this says, Nice Vision arrived at the MCC on Monday, August 12th, 2019 to begin work on the installation. Nice Vision has not completed the work on the system because they have not had access to the equipment room since FAVU arrived later that same day to export video from a camera feed on the working DVR1 system. Another team from FBI FAVU is currently on site working on exporting video from a third camera of interest connected to DVR System 1, which is currently operational and being utilized by the MCC. We will continue to export video from this camera back to at least 7/23/19, the date of the first alleged attempt. Now, keep this in mind. A third camera of interest has now been identified. That third camera of interest may very well be the one that we saw the footage from. So it's saying that they may have had footage that goes all the way back from that camera to 7/23/19, which was also on the DVR1 system. So there's two possibilities. Like I said, either it was on the DVR1 system and the report was either lying or wrong, or it was on the DVR2 system, and that's equally problematic. Either way, there should be available footage that goes all the way back to 7/23 from that other angle. Now, for now, we're back in the report by the Inspector General's Office of the DOJ. As we're going through this, if there's anything else that stands out, I'm going to point it out because there may be subsequent videos, and sometimes there'll be something I notice, and then there'll be additional information later, and then we have to revisit it, and it's worth going back to. Now, one thing we're going to be coming back to related to the autopsy is this right here. Epstein was suspended from the top bunk in a near-seated position with his buttocks approximately 1 inch to 1.5 inches off the floor. That's very significant, but that's for the later part of the video when we talk about the autopsy. Now, for now, we're back in the report by the Inspector General's Office of the DOJ. There are some statements made that help back up some of what I talked about earlier. MCC New York staff unsuccessfully attempts to recover video from the DVR2 system of the SHU, and the BOP begins repairing the DVR2 system. The FBI seizes all hard drives contained in the DVR2 system as evidence. So that was on August 10th. Then on August 14th to 15th, the FBI returns to MCC New York and seizes additional components of the DVR2 system and the entire DVR1 system. The FBI Digital Forensics Analysts Unit in Quantico, Virginia, begins to conduct a forensic analysis of MCC New York's DVR systems and determines there were catastrophic disk failures in the DVR2 system disk array, and no recordings were available on the DVR2 system after July 29th, 2019. So this would have been August 14th to 15th. That's why I was saying that the footage from Tier J likely would have been the 15th or before, because these are the only two times they went and got the hard drives from them. There's no information in any of the emails about them sending an additional clip or anything like that, so presumably they recovered that from the DVR systems that they had. It just doesn't make sense. As noted previously, at approximately 1:27 a.m. on July 23, 2019, Epstein was found lying on the floor of his cell with a piece of homemade orange cloth around his neck. That's what I was referring to when he had allegedly been attacked. Others believe something else. Now, they disregarded the fact that he said he had been assaulted because it says the chief psychologist told the OIG that after Epstein told her he wanted to be housed with the same cellmate he had originally said assaulted him, she began to think that, and so on and so forth. So he requested to be back with that cellmate, so they went ahead and said, okay, well, I guess he wasn't assaulted. And that's how they came to the conclusion that he was in fact not assaulted. Forensic psychologist 2 asked Epstein why he told another inmate that Epstein's cellmate had tried to kill him, but was now claiming that he had no memory of the incident. So I'm just trying to show you some of the official lines about what was said. So according to forensic analysis conducted by the FBI after Epstein's death, disk failures occurred in MCC, and MCC is the prison, by the way, MCC New York's DVR2 system on July 29th, 2019, which resulted in the system being unable to record. All right, so as I said before, on July 29th and following, couldn't record. So basically, part of what they determined is that there were faulty hard drives. The electronics technician told the OIG he had no idea why he did not stay at the facility to resolve the problem that day, so in other words, August 8th, but he noted for the OIG that he had not historically been required to stay after his shift ended to work on such matters. Even if he begun working on the DVR system that day, he would not have completed the work on August 8th due to the time the rebuilding process takes. Okay, this is a long, laborious process. This is not quick. It's not like something where you flip a switch and all of a sudden you've got a functioning DVR system or all of a sudden everything's fixed. This would have taken a long time. The OIG found that the electronics technician's immediate supervisor, the facility manager, was on leave that week and therefore not told on August 8th about the DVR recording failure. The facility manager confirmed that he did not learn about the camera problem until days after Epstein's death. So it wasn't even on the day of. The electronics technician told the OIG there must have been some miscommunication, that he did not say he was going to work overtime and resolve the problem that evening, since he knew the problem could not be fixed in one evening. This is not a problem that could be fixed in one evening. And so on the 10th, when it wasn't even being worked on yet, we already have footage from the 11th. The footage that I talked about should not exist. We'll keep going, but there's more and more proof that footage from August 11th should not exist unless it was on the functional DVR system, which would mean, once again, an equal amount of problems related to a cover-up. The electronics technicians eventually determined that most of the cameras in the shoe area were assigned to record to DVR2. That while cameras assigned to DVR2 were providing live video streams on August 9th and 10th, no recordings from those cameras were available due to the DVR2 hard drive issue, which the FBI later determined had occurred on July 29th. Among the cameras whose video was not recorded was the camera at the end of L tier, the shoe tier in which Epstein was housed. Only 2 cameras in the vicinity of the shoe area were recording to DVR1 at the time of Epstein's death. So basically, as I said before, they said there were only 2 cameras that were functional. One was the one that we had all of that footage from that was from that really terrible angle, and the other was on the 9th floor fire exit and 2 of the floor's 4 elevators, which was the other footage we talked about. So before we move on to the autopsy, just to summarize, we have footage from this camera right here. And apparently, according to that email with the FBI, it sounds like that was in fact recorded to DVR System 1, despite the fact that this chart says that it wasn't recorded there at all. And it looks like they probably could have gotten footage all the way back to July 23rd. Now we're going to look at the autopsy report by the medical examiner. I want you to keep in mind when we go through this, this is someone who is meticulously detailed, writes down every single scratch, bump, bruise, everything. So anything that stands out, anything that's not reported is noteworthy, or anything that is reported is also noteworthy. But the first thing we're going to look at is their description of Jeffrey Epstein's external examination. So one thing that is very interesting, because we've seen this talked about, is the medical examiner says the genitalia are atraumatic and of a normal circumcised man. Now, that doesn't sound particularly exceptional, but if you've followed this case, if you have followed the way that he has been described, some people have described his genitals as lemon-shaped, as extremely deformed. That's a literal quote. So the question is, why is it here described as perfectly normal? Now, that could be that the way it was described by somebody else was inaccurate. Or maybe this is inaccurate. He cannot both have deformed genitalia and also have normal genitalia. This is someone whose descriptions are so incredibly detailed. That is not the kind of detail that you would think would be left out. So that stands out as extremely strange to me. Now, I don't know if it's strange how the other person described it, or it's strange that the medical examiner didn't include it, because I don't know which is true, but both cannot be true. Now, something that has been talked about by other medical examiners are the fractures in his neck. Other medical examiners have suggested that's more consistent with strangulation than something that is self-inflicted. But there's some details that are left out that we're going to actually get into that I haven't heard anybody else talk about. Let's just say, for argument's sake, that could be self-inflicted, even if other people say it's more likely strangulation. That would take a tremendous amount of force. Now, what was described by the person who found him is that his buttocks were about 1 inch off the ground. That is a really small amount. Now, if somebody had enough force to break something in their neck, it's very, very likely that their buttocks would hit the ground. And therefore, there would have been bruising or trauma observed there, but there was nothing of the sort observed. There was no trauma described there. There was nothing described there. So if you can imagine that if he was in a seated position, which is a very odd position to be in, but with buttocks 1 to 1.5 inches off the floor, if you slammed yourself down hard enough to break something, then there would definitely be enough bounce to where you would have hit the ground. There's no way that he would have just stopped 1 inch and that's where he stayed. Because if he was not moving and he was seated and he was only 1 inch off the ground, then if he were to leap forward or to fall down in some respect, he most certainly would have hit the ground with his buttocks. And there's nothing described that implies that there was any trauma there whatsoever. So something is not consistent here. He both has the break in the neck, but no trauma elsewhere when he was this close to the ground. Now, there's one last area of his medical history I think is worth looking at. Now, there was an email sent on July 28th, and it says, inmate Epstein seems psychologically stable. This was getting ready to release him back to the SHU. He complained that his right arm was numb and hanging earlier. Nurse blank saw him, or Nurse redacted saw him. He again said his right arm feels somewhat numb and that he cannot make a fist with that hand. He also said he had numbness on his neck, I informed the nurse. A week before, just a little over a week before the time that he allegedly took prison linens and shredded them by hand, he couldn't even make a fist. Even at full strength, I argue, he could not have shredded linens himself. I don't think there was a chance that he could have torn them apart because that's what he was found with, was linens that were torn. These are anti-tear linens. There's no way that he would have had the strength to do that, even at 100%. But certainly, if he can't even make a fist with his right hand, for it to have recovered fully in 10 days and for him to be shredding linens, seems preposterous. There's just so much information here, medical information and otherwise, that does not add up. We'll go ahead and wrap things up here. There's a lot more that we could get into, but I just don't want to be any more technical than I already have. But there is so much information here. There's so many more little bits of information that I will probably ultimately cover in another video. Hopefully you better understand why having footage from that camera on August 11th, according to the official line, should not exist. And since it does exist, that means they should have footage that goes all the way back to July 23rd and before. And yet, it doesn't seem to exist. The only footage that we've officially been given on any of the times around the incidents with him have been blurry, have been hard to see, and have completely obscured our ability to get a clear idea of what actually happened. If you have any other thoughts about this, or if there's anything else you want to analyze, please let me know in the comments below. Last thing before we get finished up is I do want to remind you to like and subscribe if you want to see more content just like this. All right, thanks for watching.